Hello, year three. So today, I'm just going to move this out of the way. There we go. Today we are looking at subordinate clauses. We have briefly discussed these before, but we will go through what they are to make sure we're all confident before we have a little go today. So can you think of an example of a subordinate clause? Pause if you like, have a bit of a think. Oh, sorry, not a subordinate clause, a subordinate conjunction. The clause comes next. So pause the video, have a little think. Can you think of a subordinate conjunction? So the subordinate conjunctions we will be working on today are when, if, because, and although. Let's get that out of the way. So subordinate conjunctions we're going to be using at the start of a sentence today. They add information to the sentence, but they don't make sense on their own. So they're going to be going at the start of our sentences, but they don't make sense on their own. Let's have a little peek. So it doesn't make sense on its own, but it adds more information for the reader. When I think subordinate, I'm reminded of that prefix that we've learnt before about submarines, about being less important or lower or under. So we know what that prefix means. So that's what I always think about when I'm working on subordinate clauses. It's less important in the sense that it doesn't make sense on its own. However, it adds more information for the reader and helps them understand what you're talking about better, because they can explain when something happens or why something happens. So here we have some examples of subordinate clauses and the main clause as well. So the main clause is the bit of the sentence which makes sense on its own, and the subordinate clause is the bit that doesn't make sense on its own but adds more information for the reader. So let's have a look at this first one. We've got, because Pitch wanted the star, Sandman quickly got out. So the bit that makes sense on its own, which is the main clause in this sentence, is Sandman quickly got out. Oh no, that's a banned word, isn't it? We'll have to replace that in a minute. Oh, that's an extra line there. Okay, let's copy that. So Sandman quickly got out. That bit makes sense on its own, if it uses a poor verb to do it. The bit which is our subordinate clause is this bit here. Because Pitch... Is that in red? Hang on. Where is it? I want that in red. Red. There we go. Because Pitch wanted the star. Because Pitch wanted the star, what? That doesn't make sense on its own. And the wonderful thing about subordinate clauses is that we get a clue in the form of our punctuation again for when they finish. So we get a comma again, and that is a clue showing us that the subordinate clause has finished, and the main clause, the bit that makes sense on its own, is about to start. So you have a little look at the next three and decide which bit is the main clause and which bit is the subordinate clause. I will read all three to you as well, but then you're going to pause and have a little go. If the child didn't wish him well, Sandy wouldn't have survived the crash. When Pitch attacked, Sandy crashed into the earth. Although the wind was blowing, Sandman searched through the sky. So pause now and have a little go identifying the subordinate clauses in those sentences. So, again, in the first one, if the child didn't wish him well, Sandy wouldn't have survived. Our subordinate clause in this sentence is if the child didn't wish him well. That does not make sense on its own at all. And we've got that clue in the punctuation again, which I shall circle so we can spot it, of a comma to show us that subordinate clause is finishing. The main clause, what's the main clause? The main clause is Sandy wouldn't have survived the crash. That bit does make sense on its own. Sandy wouldn't have survived the crash. We add more information to the reader by saying if the child didn't wish him well, Sandy wouldn't have survived the crash. So looking at that next one, our subordinate clause is when pitch attacked, and we've got the clue in the punctuation again because we have the comma. And then we also have the main clause, and the main clause is Sandy crashed into the earth. That bit makes sense on its own. That is our main clause. Our subordinate clause, when pitch attacked, is the bit that doesn't make sense on its own, but gives the reader more information for telling specifically when Sandy crashed into the earth. And the final one at the bottom, our subordinate clause, although the wind was blowing. And we have our clue with our punctuation, with our comma. And our main clause is Sandman searched through the sky. So that's our main clause. Sandman searched through the sky. That is our main clause. Although the wind was blowing. That bit does not make sense on its own. Although the wind was blowing, something else must have been happening as well. And that was Sandman searched through the sky. So today, you are going to be using these subordinate conjunctions, because, if, when, or, and although, to create some sentences. I am going to provide you with the subordinate clause, but you need to have a go trying to finish them off with a main clause, the bit that makes sense on its own. You need to make sure those ideas are linked together and they make sense together. So the subordinate clauses, which I have given you, are if Sandy hadn't heard the wish, because the children were scared, when all was lost, although the night was at its darkest. So those are the subordinate clauses I've given you, and I would like you to finish those off. So have a go. If you want to come up with some subordinate clauses of your own, that's absolutely fine, and I can't wait to see them. But if you just want to finish these ones off, that's absolutely perfect as well. And yeah, just give it a really good try for me. Enjoy, and I'll see you very soon for your story. Take care. Bye.